I think I need to master the ice first, he said. And I've never really tried anything with lightning, but yet, I could make that work. That's another one you shouldn't test alone, Hound added, as though remembering suddenly that he was supposed to be the health and safety monitor, not the guy encouraging Iruka to come up with new ways to accidentally kill himself. Yet. Iruka rolled his eyes. Are you volunteering to be my SEAL's supervisor? Hound paused. Iruka had meant it flippantly, but Hound took everything far too seriously. I can't be around all the time, he said. Iruka waited for him to go on, but he didn't. It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no either. Iruka was reminded of the other night when Hound had needed lots of prompting to give voice to a whole thought. Was this some weird quirk of his, or was he just allergic to saying anything remotely nice to Iruka? Since Iruka didn't particularly want Umbu supervision every time he wanted to test out new seals, he didn't push for a proper answer. Let's try the second one, he said. The big kaboom. He chose a dry patch of grass to set up his supercharged explosive tag, with another 3 barrier seals around the outside. Will your barrier be strong enough to contain it? Hound asked. Barriers are my speciality, Iruka said. They can take more than a double charge. Hound made a doubtful noise. What are you planning to use these for anyway? He asked as they backed away. What do you think they're for? I'm a ninja, remember? I go on missions and fight bad guys. You've also been known to misuse seals around the village. Iruka stopped walking and looked up at him, genuinely shocked. You think I'd set traps with combat seals just for a prank? Hound shrugged. Maybe. You're overconfident, and you don't always think things through. Like the poison seal. If you're capable of putting yourself in unnecessary danger, then I can't assume you wouldn't endanger others as well. In the year they'd known each other, Hound had got under Iruka's skin in a lot of ways. Iruka was used to being annoyed with him, or downright infuriated, but this was the first time Hound's words had hurt. He was sure it was written all over his face, but either Hound didn't notice or he didn't care. Is that why you're hanging around? Iruka asked. It's not because you think my seals are cool, it's because you think I might find it funny to blow someone up. Hound finally looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. I don't think you should play around with seals without proper supervision, he started, but Iruka cut him off, voice rising. I'm not playing around, he snapped. And if you think you count as proper supervision, then you're kidding yourself. You don't know the first thing about seals. You don't get to waltz over here and act all superior when I'm the one who's put in hours of study to get good at this. Yeah, I might not be perfect yet, but I'll never get better if I'm not allowed to practice. I'm not saying you shouldn't practice, Hound said impatiently. I'm saying you shouldn't practice alone. You're a beginner, and you're a kid, and it would be easy for something to go wrong. I know what I'm doing. Iruka yelled. Just shut up and let me work. Iruka, Hound started, but Iruka didn't want to hear another word. He brought his hands together and set off the explosion. He'd intended it to drown out Hound's next words, but it did much more than that. Something smacked him hard in the side, and then his ears were ringing and there was pain, and he realized the hard thing was the ground, and he was lying on the grass and blinking bright spots out of his vision. There was a loud ringing sound in his ears, and the whole world was wavering around him, under him. For a long timeless moment he couldn't understand what had happened, and his consciousness wavered in and out. It came to him during one light-headed moment of clarity. The explosion hadn't been contained. He'd forgotten to activate the barrier seals. What an amateur mistake. His last thought before he passed out was that Hound was going to be so fucking smug that he'd been right. The only good thing about waking up in the hospital was that Hound wasn't there to say "I told you so." Iruka pretended to sleep for a little while longer, partly because he was dying of mortification and partly because he was frightened of finding out how badly he was hurt. This wasn't the first time he'd had an accident with a seal. It wasn't even the first time he'd hurt himself, although he'd never landed himself in the hospital before. He kept reliving it over and over, feeling stupider each time. His traitorous mind didn't even stick to the facts. Unable to stop himself, Iruka pictured the aftermath he hadn't been conscious for, cycling through the possibilities, Hound picking Iruka up and carrying him through the streets for everyone to gawp at, Hound leaving him on the training field for someone else to deal with, Hound lying beside him with blood on his mask, unconscious or dead. The last one was nightmarish enough that he finally opened his eyes. Even then, it took a few seconds for him to notice he wasn't alone in the room. Viper was sitting in a hard, plastic visitor's chair at the end of the bed. She had a sheaf of papers in her lap and was reading something, occasionally scribbling an annotation with a cheap-looking ballpoint. "I wondered how long you were going to play dead for," she said without looking up. "You feeling okay?" She made one more note and then capped her pen and gave him her full attention. Iruka wished she wouldn't. He avoided her gaze as he shifted tentatively, trying to push himself up onto his elbows, but his left arm didn't like that at all. Hastily, he lowered himself back down. "Define okay," he muttered. Viper stood up and placed her papers down on her chair before coming around to the side of the bed. Iruka still refused to look at her, even as she helped him sit up against the pillows. "The doctors said you took a nasty bump to the head and you'll have some colorful bruising, but otherwise you're right as rain," she said. "You're sure I didn't break my arm?" Iruka asked, raising it above the covers so he could inspect it. Some of that promised bruising was already darkening the skin around his elbow. He wasn't sure if he'd fallen on this arm or if it had taken the brunt of the explosion, but either way it wasn't pretty. "Not even a fracture," Viper promised. The only thing they were worried about was the concussion. "How's your head?" There was a dull throbbing where the side of Iruka's head had smacked into the ground, but it wasn't the worst headache he'd ever had. Someone had taken his hair tie out and his hair hung around his shoulders. It didn't seem to be crusted with blood, which he took as a good sign. "Not too bad," he said, raising a hand to poke very lightly at the sore patch. "Ow, maybe don't touch it," Viper said dryly, taking him by the wrist and moving his hand away. "You know, you're very lucky you weren't hurt worse. Do you know how worried we were when Hound showed up and said you were in the hospital?" Iruka cringed, but at the mention of Hound's code name he finally dared look up. "Is Hound okay?" he asked, and hated how his voice came out small. "He's fine," Viper said curtly, as though she regretted this fact. "I'm sure he'll have a few bruises too, but his armor did its job. I've already given him a thorough scolding. Honestly, he's captained his own team of Umbu before yet he can't even keep a child out of trouble." "I'm not a child," Iruka protested. "Of course you're not, sweetie, my mistake," Viper said, reaching out to ruffle his hair before remembering his head wound and patting his shoulder instead. "But you are a genin and he's a jounin, so anything that happens to you on his watch is his responsibility. He's being punished proportionately so he'll take your safety more seriously in future." At any other time, Iruka would be delighted to hear all the gory details of Hound getting an earful, but today he just felt guilty. "But it was my fault," he said. "I made a stupid mistake. He warned me not to mess around with seals and I did anyway and I could have got him hurt." Viper perched on the edge of the bed beside him. "That's not how he told the story," she said gently. "I don't think he blames you at all." "He should," Iruka muttered. "I do." "Oh, honey." Viper wrapped an arm around his shoulder and pulled him gently against her side. He didn't try to squirm away like he usually would have done. "Making mistakes is just a part of learning. Next time you'll do better." "But what if I don't? What if I make an even bigger mistake and someone really gets hurt? What if Asuka-sensei hears about this and won't teach me seals anymore?" That was such a terrible thought that he felt a jolt of panic. "She doesn't know, does she? Did someone tell her?" "No one's told her," Viper soothed him. "But I'm sure it'll take more than mastering a powerful explosive tag to scare her off." Iruka's panic abated a little. "I didn't master anything." "Well," Hound was very impressed, "and you know how hard it is to wring praises out of him." "He said that?" "That he was impressed." "Not in so many words," Viper said, and Iruka was about to dismiss the whole idea when she added, "He said you don't know how powerful you really are. And I'm inclined to agree with him." Iruka suddenly felt embarrassed again. Hound's opinion shouldn't mean anything to him. It wasn't like he needed Hound's approval or cared what he thought, but he wished he'd heard those words from Hound's lips. "I'm not that good," he mumbled. "Now, Iruka, you know I'll smack anyone who calls you names. Carry on with that negativity and I'll have to smack you." Iruka snorted softly. You can't smack me while I'm in the hospital. Go ahead and try me, mister. I dare you. Iruka turned his face into her shoulder and she squeezed him gently. Sometimes, he really missed having a mother. After a few moments of comfortable silence, Viper shifted and Iruka looked up. Looks like you have a visitor, she said, and he followed her gaze to the window. There was an umbu outside, hanging awkwardly onto the wall. Iruka felt his face flush. It was Hound. Viper got up and crossed the room, opening the window and standing with her hands on her hips as Hound hesitated outside. Well, she demanded. Are you coming in or not? Silently, Hound slipped through the window so that he could stand awkwardly on the linoleum instead. Iruka was relieved to see that he didn't look injured, but it was a short-lived relief, overshadowed by his mortification. Luckily he didn't have to say anything yet because Viper was giving Hound a dressing down. What time do you call this? She was saying. You should have been the one sitting by his bedside waiting for him to wake up. Have you even spoken to the doctors? Are you taking this seriously? Viper, Iruka said weakly. I'm fine. I know you are, sweetie, but Hound didn't know that, Viper said, not taking her gaze from Hound, who was standing stiffly under the onslaught, not even trying to defend himself. You are not to upset him any more today, you understand me? She waited a beat. I can't hear you. I understand, Hound mumbled. And you are to be back at the office by 3 o'clock sharp. You're grounded, remember. You can't ground me, Hound protested. Watch me, Viper said with steel in her voice. 3 o'clock. Not a minute later or we will be having words. Having delivered this warning, she turned back to Iruka, who fought not to flinch. I brought you some pajamas in case they keep you in overnight, she said, voice instantly sweet again. And a couple of books in case you get bored. I'll come in and check on you later, okay? Thanks, Iruka said. She came over and gave him one last gentle hug, and this time he would have wriggled away if he wasn't in pain, and then she gathered her pile of paperwork and left through the window, shutting it neatly behind her as she went. Hound and Iruka stared at each other in a moment of mutual embarrassment. Guess we know who the favorite child is, Hound said, and Iruka snorted as the tension deflated. Are you really grounded? He asked as Hound pulled up the plastic chair and sat beside the bed. Like, grounded? How does that even work? It doesn't, Hound said. From this close, Iruka could see him roll his eyes through the gap in his mask, or, more specifically, roll his eye, singular. He'd never noticed before, but Hound kept his left eye closed. She wants me to stay in the office when I'm not out on missions or patrols. But she's not my captain. She has no say over my schedule. Does that mean you won't be back at the office by 3 o'clock sharp? Iruka asked, trying not to grin. Hound avoided his gaze. I do have some paperwork to finish, he muttered. So I'll probably be in the office anyway, but not because she told me to. Sure. You keep telling yourself that. Hound scowled at him, pale eyebrows furrowing through the eyeholes before softening again. How long do you have to stay in hospital for? He asked, and his voice had gone stiff and formal again. Dunno. I haven't seen a doctor yet. I only just woke up. But Viper said probably not long. Maybe just until tomorrow. As he spoke, Hound glanced him over, that sharp gaze catching on Iruka's bruised arm. It made Iruka feel oddly exposed, not so much the gaze itself, which was clinical, but the fact that Hound was even bothering to check for damage. Like maybe he actually cared if Iruka was hurt. Are you okay? Iruka asked, trying to do his own discreet check of Hound's visible skin, but there wasn't much of it. Just his shoulders and enough of his biceps to reveal the red swirl of the tattoo. I'm fine, Hound said, and now his tone was downright brusque. Iruka looked down at his bedsheets. Hound was mad at him. That shouldn't have upset him. It was hardly the first time, but for some reason it felt different today. I'm sorry, he said in a small voice. It was an accident. I should have been paying more attention. I never meant to hurt anyone. There was a brief silence. Iruka didn't dare look up. Then Hound said slowly, I know that. He didn't say anything else, and Iruka found himself babbling just to fill the silence. I really wasn't going to use them for pranks. I know you don't like me, but I didn't take up seals because I wanted to hurt people, I chose seals because I want to protect people. And I pull pranks because what else am I supposed to do? Sit around and feel sad all the time? He clamped his mouth shut before he said too much, aware that he'd already let out more than he'd meant to. I don't not like you, Hound said. Iruka looked up in surprise. It took him a moment to rewind through his outburst and realize what Hound was responding to. Yes you do, he said. I mean, no you don't. Don't talk in double negatives, damn it. When have I ever said that I don't like you? Hound asked. He wasn't looking quite at Iruka's face, instead staring past his shoulder at the pillows propped against the headboard. Just because you've never said it doesn't mean it isn't true, Iruka said. You're always getting up my ass about something. Because you're always causing trouble, Hound pointed out. Technically this was true, but Iruka didn't see how it affected his point. Tell me you like me then, he said, jutting his chin in a challenge. If you really do. Hound made a little strangled sound in the back of his throat. Iruka waited. When absolutely zero coherent noises emerged from behind the mask, Iruka told himself it was what he'd expected. That heavy feeling in his chest couldn't be crushing disappointment because he'd never hoped for anything anyway. That's what I thought, he said, trying for clipped and haughty, or anything other than a wavering mess. Thanks for bringing me to the hospital. I'm sure you have other things to do now so you can go. I like you, Hound blurted out. Iruka froze in the act of gesturing to the window. He almost asked Hound to repeat himself, and it was just as well he'd lost the power of speech because he didn't think he could handle hearing those words a second time. It wasn't just his face that was burning, he was fairly sure that even the tips of his fingers were turning pink. Then he grabbed the pillow and smacked Hound square in the face. It was the first and probably only time he would ever land a blow, even a soft, pillowy one, on an umbu. Hound spluttered, snatching the pillow out of Iruka's unresisting hands. What was that for? You can't just say that. Iruka said, voice so high it was almost a screech. But you told me to. I didn't think you actually would. Hound put the pillow down at the other end of the bed, out of easy reach. He kept a wary eye on Iruka as he did. I'll take it back if you want, he huffed. No, I want you to like me. Iruka said, and immediately wished he had another pillow so he could smack himself in the face. Well, good, Hound said defensively. There was a beat of silence while they each furiously tried to work out what to do now. Iruka was a panicked second away from pressing the call button beside his bed when Hound stood up abruptly. I have to go now, he said. I'm grounded. Right, Iruka agreed gratefully. And I have to, not be concussed. Don't blow yourself up again, Hound said. And then he vanished out of the window so quickly that Iruka might have described it as running away. He sat staring after Hound for a while, not sure what had just happened. Hound liked him. That only raised more questions than it answered, like why? And since when? Iruka allowed himself to replay the memory again and blushed once more all the way to his toes. It took him a while to realize that he hadn't said it back, and Hound hadn't asked. He turned away from the window and wondered what his answer would have been. Iruka ended up staying in the hospital overnight for observation. Several more umbu stopped by that evening, which stopped him from getting too bored, but he was glad the next morning when the doctor gave him a final check and pronounced him healthy enough to leave. He was making his way out of the building, idly wondering whether anyone would show up and insist they walk him home, when he bumped into Anko at the door. She looked as surprised to see him as he was to see her. What are you doing walking around? She demanded. I heard you got blown up. Shouldn't you be in bed or something? I'm fine, Iruka said. Did you come to visit me? Of course I came to visit. What part of blown up should I not be worried about? I was only blown up a little bit, Iruka assured her. I just got discharged. You can walk me home if you want. She fell into step beside him, still looking him anxiously up and down. Iruka was strangely touched to know she'd been worried about him. How did you even know I was here? He asked. Some umbu came to my house and told me. Iruka had almost forgotten their face smashing and umbu's consequent misunderstanding. His headache started to come back. Really, he said, trying to keep his voice light. Did they say why they specifically needed you to know? Anko frowned. It was kind of weird actually. He popped up at my window last night and said you were in the hospital and I should come see you. He kept asking me if I'd look after you, and was I really worried, and how much did I care about you. I know you said some of the Umbu have basically adopted you, but I felt like I was your no-good boyfriend and your overprotective dad was trying to figure out my intentions. Iruka winced, both from the pain in his head and the sheer existential anguish of having parents. Pseudo-parents in this case, who admittedly were trying their best. He appreciated that one of them had made sure a friend would visit while he was hurt, but did they have to be so embarrassing about it? Did you tell them about the headbutt? Anko asked. She sounded leery about bringing it up again, but at least she wasn't calling it a kiss. No, but one of them saw and assumed the worst, Iruka admitted. I told them they had it all wrong. I don't even want to know what Umbu romances are like if they see us almost breaking our teeth and assume we're anything other than friends. The awkwardness was settling over them again, and, desperate to break it, Iruka added, they gave me porn instead of the talk. Anko spluttered and then burst into laughter, and it was worth the ribbing. Iruka knew he was about to get to feel comfortable with her again. They gave you porn? Anko wheezed. Like a dirty magazine? No. Thank God. Some romance book with lots of sex scenes. Probably. I haven't read it. Are you going to read it? She sounded far too enthusiastic. Is it even legal for me to read sexy stories? You're avoiding the question, Iruka. I don't know. Maybe? Why don't you read it and tell me if it's any good? Your Umbu friends would love it if they saw you sharing your porn with me. They'd think we were trading tips. Oh my God, is it weird stuff? What do they think you're into? I regret telling you any of this, Iruka said. Are there pictures? I hate you so much. Careful, Iruka, or I'll break up with you and you'll have to find someone else to smash faces with. Wait. She pointed to the bruises that had formed overnight on the side of his face. How'd you get those anyway? Are you cheating on me? Wow, Iruka did not need to think about smashing faces with Hound. Yeah, with training field 22, he said. And an explosive tag.